Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zhang here, and the official VGC Series 1 rule set has finally been announced. In this rule set, no Paradox and Legendary Pokemon will be allowed, and so it officially starts on December 2nd at 4 o'clock UTC, and will go on until the end of January. And so presumably this is the rule set that we're going to play for the very first regional championships in San Diego in early January. This is a really big mix-up from what I think a lot of players were expecting. A lot of the teams that people have been building in doubles so far have revolved around some of these Paradox Pokemon and Legendary Pokemon. And so in this video, I'm just going to give you my brief thoughts on the rules and also go over what I think the early metagame may look like and offer you some sample sets for a lot of the top Pokemon that I expect to be popular. So I hope you find this video helpful. If you do, please show your support by leaving a like in the video. It really helps me and the channel out a lot. And if you're new, welcome. My name is Aaron and I do all kinds of competitive VGC content and I specialize in battling. So if that's something you're interested in, would mean a lot if you consider subscribing. But yeah, let's just jump into things. So as you can see, Ranked Battle Series 1 has officially been announced. You have to use non-legendary or non-paradox Pokemon in the regional Pokedex, and it'll start from 4 o'clock UTC December 2nd all the way until January 1st, 2023. Now, of course, with this rule set, a lot of you are probably wondering, well, are the Paradox and Legendary Pokemon going to be allowed at some point? My guess is yes. It's very much like Sword and Shield, where we had a rotating rule set, and as time went along, more Pokemon essentially got added, such as Gigantamax forms or Pokemon from DLCs. And so, yeah, other than that, the rules here are what you would normally expect for competitive VGC. You have to use Pokemon from the regional Pokedex, as mentioned. You have to have a team of 4 to 6 Pokemon from level 1 to 100. Everything is set to level 50. You have 10 minutes of your time, 90 seconds of team preview, and 60 seconds of turn timer. And you can see all of the banned Pokemon down here, but like I mentioned, it's essentially just all of the Paradox Pokemon and all of the Legendary Pokemon as well. So, you know, there are a lot of mixed opinions about a rule set like this. I personally don't mind starting Scarlet and Violet without the Paradox and Restricteds and Legendaries, because the truth is, I think that the Paradox Pokemon, some of them are really, really strong, right? Like Fluttermane and Chi-Yu in particular is a crazy combination, but there are some that are just very, very powerful, and I think that if they were allowed, the metagame will probably get centralized around them fairly quickly, so I do not mind trying a format where none of them are allowed. I think it'll be a fun first 2 months to explore brand new Pokemon and strategies, but like I said, I do expect them to get added on at some point. I also really like the rotating series personally, but I do think 2 months might be a little bit short because you don't give like enough time for a metagame to really develop. Normally metagames really develop when you have players who are trying to build super innovative teams, and that normally, you know, correlates with live tournaments, for example. So I don't know what the plan is after Series 1, whether or not Paradox and Legendaries will be added right away afterwards. But either way, I have to say I'm excited for the first 2 months, and I think we'll be able to utilize a lot of cool teams and strategies. So yeah, let's actually talk about some Pokemon now. So the point of this section is to essentially go over Pokemon that I think will be especially popular on day 1 in the format. Now, in a format and an early metagame, there's so many things that are viable, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything here, but the idea is to get you up to speed with the Pokemon I know will be especially popular starting on day 1. I'm going to offer a sample set for each Pokemon, but please keep in mind that in competitive Pokemon, there's so many different ways you can build, especially in an early metagame. So just because you see Garchomp, for example, you shouldn't assume it's exactly the set that I'm offering here. The sets here are really just to give you some inspiration for how people might use them, as well as if you want to utilize these Pokemon, give you a sense of how to potentially build it. And so, yeah, I've also been able to accumulate a bunch of different spreads and Pokemon from teams that are already out there, and those trainers are credited accordingly when, yeah, it is attributed to someone. So let's just dive into things. The first group of Pokemon I want to talk about are setup-oriented Pokemon. The idea behind these Pokemon is that they are already fairly strong, and they can further increase their stats via a setup move, often to the point where they can just sweep you. I think this is just a fairly easy strategy to execute, especially given the amount of support that exists in the format, whether it be Fake Out or Redirection. And I think with Terra now as well, you can often aim to get a boost and then just go for an offensive Terra to just pick up big knockouts, or a defensive Terra to survive, KO something that's threatening you, and then sweep from there. And so a lot of different ways that you can consider these Pokemon, but here are some that I think will be especially popular earlier on in the format. The first one is Garchomp. This is a Pokemon that doesn't really need any introduction. It's a multi-time world champion, and it's just got great base stats overall, and can boost its stats further through Swords Dance. And so Garchomp now can use Clear Amulet in Generation 9 as well to block Intimidates, which is nice. Other items I think you might expect to see include things like Life Orb or Lumberry, for example. And for Terra typing, I think Steel and Ground will be especially popular. Steel as a defensive Terra, and Ground for an offensive Terra. Next to the Garchomp is Tyranitar, another Pokemon that doesn't really need any introduction. I think Tyranitar is really, really flexible on how you can use it, but I think Dragon Dance is fairly cool. One of Tyranitar's weaknesses in previous generations was that, of course, it has that 4 times weakness to fighting, and so Ghost Terra is interesting because you can make it immune to fighting and type attacks, but I've also seen Rock and Dark Terra already on Dragon Dance sets. Gyarados is the next Pokemon. This was built by an Italian player, Federico, and it is a Dragon Dance set with Terra Flying. The idea here is that Terra Blast plus Flying is super, super good. Grass is not exactly very unpopular, or I should say it is quite popular in the format, especially with things like Amoonguss, for example. And so having coverage against that is really nice. One of the downsides of Gyarados is that it doesn't really get access to too many good flying type attacks if you're not using Terra Blast. And so the idea is to just take advantage of both of your same type attack bonuses, deal massive amounts of damage. But with Gyarados, I think you could also definitely go with the defensive Terra to get rid of, for example, the electric type weakness. So you could go for something like ground or grass, for example. The next Pokemon is Garganacl, and this is a Pokemon that I featured at the very start of competitive doubles here in Scarlet and Violet. It is just one of the best Iron Defense body press users I think that it's ever existed in competitive VGC, and so this moveset is fairly standard. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can run the EV spread. This was built by Hamster Mania, who finished in the top cut of the World Championships this past year and is an excellent team builder. And for Terra, Grass has been especially popular, but I've also seen like Fighting and Water, for example. I think, yeah, this is a fairly standard moveset. The idea is that it's really difficult to KO you. After getting just a single Iron Defense off, you are just so boosted up, and it'll stay on the field for a very long time. Moving on, we've got Belly-Drum Azumarill. I think Belly-Drum Azumarill is a Pokemon that's seen play throughout the history of VGC, and I really, really liked it back in 2015 as a counter to a lot of like the Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, Kangaskhan teams that were running around. So yeah, I think Azumarill here continues to be a strong pick. You have the priority Aqua Jet, which is really nice, and you're able to get Belly-Drum off to get to +6 attack immediately. Following Azumarill, we've got Goldengo. Now, I think this Pokemon will be especially popular, and once again, like, a lot of these EV spreads are just 252, 252, and so I always, you know, when I, like, start building teams, I kind of just go with basic spreads and then adjust accordingly once I want to see, like, what kind of spreads or what kind of attacks I'm trying to survive. So, I think this is a Pokemon that could definitely invest a lot in bulk specifically, but it gets access to Nasty Plot, which is really nice, and its ability is incredible. It makes it immune to status moves as well. So, I think I could see this being Life Orb, Nasty Plot, maybe with a lot less special attack and speed investment, more in bulk. You could certainly do that, and I've also seen like Choice Specs variants, but yeah, this Pokemon can be really nasty, no pun intended, after getting the Nasty Plot off. Following that, we've got Scizor, which is one of my all-time favorite Pokemon. Now, Scizor no longer gets access to some of the cool tricks it had in previous generations, like the Steel Gem Swords Dance combination, for example, but it's still a really solid Pokemon. Lumberry is here to cover for Will-O-Wisps, but I think you could definitely run items such as Life Orb, for example, or Clear Amulet as well. So yeah, Swords Dance Scizor, I mean, the main idea is to Swords Dance and Bullet Punch. You can choose your bug type attack as well. There's X-Scissor, but Pounce here can lower your opponent's speed for speed control. I shouldn't say can, it will lower your opponent's speed, which is fairly nice. And so, yeah, I think Steel coverage is solid, especially into like a lot of the fairies that exist in the format. And so you could definitely drop some EVs, for example, in HP or attack and run it in speed if you want to speed creep certain things around that tier. But yeah, this is a good starting point, I think, for Scizor. Moving on, we've got one of my all-time favorite Pokemon, Rotom Wash. This is a Nasty Plot set, and so the idea here is that you outspeed max speed Tyranitar with this EV investment, and otherwise you just have max HP or near max HP and the rest in special attack. So yeah, the idea here is that this can just start Nasty Plotting up and deal massive amounts of damage. I've also seen Terra Blast used on Nasty Plot Rotoms, especially with Grass Terra. The idea behind Grass Terra here is that, yeah, Rotom with Levitate is weak to Grass, but when you turn into Grass, now you cover for like the Grass weakness, which is really, really sweet. So you could definitely get rid of like Protect for a Terra Blast, for example. But yeah, this Pokemon can just set up really nicely into a lot of Pokemon, and it is a pretty awesome damage dealer as well. But once again, like all the other Pokemon featured, you could consider an offensive Terra like Electric or Water as well. Finally, we've got a Salamence set that was developed by 3-time world champion Ray Rizzo. This is just a Dragon Dance set with Dragon Claw and Iron Head, and so the idea is you can steal Terra, and you're actually going to deal massive amounts of damage into fairy types such as Sylveon, get the same type attack bonus from that, while also keeping your same type attack bonus from Dragon Claw. So you'll see there's a pretty clear trend for a lot of these Pokemon. It's like you have a boosting attack, you have 1 or 2 attacks that match your typing, and then Protect. And so that's the general trend here, but I think these are Pokemon that I expect to be setup oriented that you'll see play right from day 1 of the format. So following setup Pokemon, I think it's good to probably talk about the support Pokemon that will surround a lot of these setup-oriented Pokemon. So split it into different categories, and the first list is really just a group of Tailwind users. And here, a lot of these are actual sets that high-level players have used, and so they're credited in the nickname, as you can see. But yeah, Tailwind is really interesting. Tailwind was really dominant throughout Sword and Shield, especially with dynamic speed being a thing, where as soon as you use Tailwind, your partner will be able to capitalize off that speed boost immediately. And so there are only 2 priority Tailwind users in the format currently, and that's Talonflame and the Murkrow. So Talonflame here has Gale Wings, and so you're going to use that primarily to set up the Tailwind, and Covert Cloak is really nice because you're not affected by secondary effects, and so you don't have to worry about Fake Out as much. And so this is just a full offense set. I've also seen players run like No Attack, Max HP, and Will-O-Wisp instead. But yeah, generally the idea is that this is going to be one of your most effective Tailwind users. Following that, we've got Murkrow, which is the other priority Tailwind user. This one gets access to Prankster, and so there are a lot of cool moves that Murkrow gets access to. Generally, you're going to want Brave Bird and Tailwind, but I feel like there's a lot of flexibility in the remaining moves, and so this set, for example, that I think is fun, has Feather Dance and Haze. We featured Murkrow actually at the very beginning of Scarlet and Violet, and that set had Quash and Sunny Day. I do think Sunny Day here maybe has a little bit less value since Paradox Pokemon, for example, aren't allowed. But yeah, there's so many options you could have for Murkrow, and Haze can be particularly powerful for those setup Pokemon that I talked about. But of course, if you're using your own setup Pokemon, be careful about hazing away your own boosts. Items here, you could definitely run the Covert Cloak as well, or Eject Button, for example, as well as Focus Sash. Next Pokemon here is Kilowattrel, which is a interesting Tailwind user because it has one of the highest base speeds in the format, and so often you will actually be able to just move before a lot of Pokemon naturally. You don't necessarily need the priority, set up Tailwind, and go from there. And so, yeah, this Pokemon I think is just one of the faster Tailwind users that you can use. So, there are obviously other Tailwind users that exist, but I think these are some that you might expect to see earlier on. Now we've got some classic support. This is just Grimmsnarl. I think Grimmsnarl in this format, you can run like Clay Dual Screens. I've seen Focus Sash as well. I do think, you know, as I talked about previously, I think this Pokemon may now see more attack investment. For example, I've seen players who run like Fake Out, Sucker Punch, and Spirit Break all in the same set and have near max attack investment. And that's because in a non-Dynamax format, you know, Grimmsnarl really only played in Dynamax formats throughout Sword and Shield, but in a non-Dynamax format, this thing can actually deal significant damage. And of course, it gets a new trick Imparting Shot as well. I think Fake Out also will probably see a little bit more usage relative to Scarlet and Violet, since this is one of the premier Fake Out users. Next Pokemon to talk about is Amoonguss. This is not a Pokemon that really needs any introduction. It has been so good throughout so many years of VGC, and it is really still the same deal, just ultra bulky, ultra difficult to KO, and Terra is really nice for it. Especially because Torkoal, I think, will be very popular early on, and so Amoonguss here has Water Terra as well as the Aqua Berry, and so the general idea is to be able to sustain and potentially Spore Amoonguss, or Spore Torkoal, I should say, under Trick Room. And yeah, like hard Trick Room teams with Torkoal, I think, will certainly be something you'll have to watch out for, and this is where Amoonguss can really come in handy. Amoonguss is the primary redirection user, but we do have a new fun redirection user in Mousehold. Now, Mousehold I think can be used offensively or defensively, but because it gets access to Friend Guard and gets access to moves like Helping Hand and Follow Me, I do think it's a really good support-oriented Pokemon. So Mousehold or Amoonguss plus a lot of those setup Pokemon that I just listed I think will be especially popular early on in the format. The idea is that you have Friend Guard to protect your Pokemon, and you also can go for Follow Me to redirect attacks away. You can go for Grass Terror in particular to kind of, you know, be a nuisance for Amoonguss, because often Amoongusses will want to Spore into Mousehold to, you know, slow things down a little bit, and you have good coverage here with Super Fang as well, just to be able to deal some damage to things. And so, yeah, this thing also has really solid base speed, and so it's a really solid redirection user. Obviously, a lot less bulky than Amoonguss, but you can consider it mainly for moves like Helping Hand as well as the Friend Guard. Moving on, we've got Arcanine. Now, Incineroar does not exist in this format, so Arcanine naturally rises to become one of the top Intimidators. Intimidate is significantly weaker now, thanks to so many abilities blocking it, as well as Clear Amulet, but I think Arcanine is still just really consistent as an option, and even without Intimidate, getting access to Snarl and Will-O-Wisp means that you can generally disrupt a lot of Pokemon that people will generally use. And so, yeah, this is something that really shines in the regional Dex formats. I've also seen players run it offensively, but gets access to a great set of defensive moves. Moving on, we've got another redirection user in Indeedee. This is exactly what you would expect to see following Sword and Shield. The one downside is that it now does not get access to Expanding Force, but if you're looking for just a really solid redirection user or a way to set up Psychic Terrain to bypass those pesky priority moves such as Extreme Speed from Dragonite or Grimmsnarl just going for any Prankster priority attacks, this is a great solution to that. And so this is particularly common, I think, on Trick Room oriented teams, especially with something like Hatterene, but Indeedee is just a super solid redirection user, and I think the Psychic Terrain is something that really deserves a good mention as well. The next one is a cool brand new Pokemon, and that's the Tinkaton, and this Pokemon gets access to Fake Out. And so this was a set used by a Japanese player, Kona, and it actually had Metal Coat to increase your damage output a little bit, but Fake Out, Play Rough, Gigaton Hammer, and Terra Blast with the Water Terra. And so Tinkaton does get access to Own Tempo, which is pretty nice because that makes it immune to Intimidate, which is really valuable. The other abilities are also solid though, so you can definitely consider it. I think you can also consider items such as Assault Vest, for example. At the end of the day, this Pokemon doesn't exactly have the best attack, but it's a decently fast Fake Out user, which I think can be valuable. Moving on from that, we've got Annihilate. I put Annihilate under the support section, but this can really fall into so many different categories. It's mainly the Choice Scarf kind of set that I'm more designating as support, and the idea is to just use it to pick up a knockout onto something while enabling another strong attacker on your team. Now, this can be with like Trick Room, for example. Annihilate gets a KO with Final Gambit. Whatever is next to Annihilate maybe sets up Trick Room, and then you bring in something like Torkoal to replace that Pokemon or replace the Annihilate, and then go from there. I've also seen Annihilate with Choice Scarf paired with like the Dondozo and the Tatsugiri combination, so that's something to look out for. But this is going to be one of the strongest early format Pokemon in my opinion, and it's also really flexible in how it can be built. So Choice Scarf is a possibility, but I've also seen people just use offensive sets with Life Orb, for example. This one is like, I listed it because I think it deserves an honorable mention. I'm not sure people will really be able to use Palmot very effectively, but I felt like because it's a brand new Pokemon that gets access, of course, to Revival Blessing, which allows you to heal a fainted Pokemon to half its health, it's really interesting. The team that this actually came from was a Perish Trap team, and so I think Perish Trap definitely is a, you know, viable team composition in Scarlet and Violet doubles. And so, yeah, I don't really think most people will use this early on, but I just thought it was worth mentioning because, yeah, it actually does get access to Fake Out, and Revival Blessing in itself is a really interesting move. The final Pokemon I have under this section is Sableye. Sableye is just another Fake Out user. You know, the last couple we've talked about are Fake Out users, but it gets access to some really good utilities such as Will-O-Wisp, as well as Helping Hand and Quash, for example, and also can have Weather Control. And so, yeah, this Pokemon can just be kind of annoying to deal with. It can't, you know, get hit by Fake Out either because it's Ghost typing, and super good for disruption, especially with Will-O-Wisps into a lot of those physical attackers that are out there. So I expect a lot of these Pokemon that I just listed to be paired with some of those setup Pokemon that I talked about earlier. The next group of Pokemon to talk about revolve around weather strategies. The general idea here is you have a Pokemon enable the weather and then have another Pokemon take advantage of said weather condition. And so, yeah, I've just listed one for each weather here, but of course, tons of different ways that you can run the sweeper that wants to take advantage of the weather. First combo is Abomasnow plus Titan, which I recently covered in a video, so if you want to see me battle with this duo, check out the link in the description below. General idea is that Titan just has a really good base HP and attack stat, and has relatively mediocre defenses, but you can boost those defenses via Assault Vest and setting up the Snow, which gives it a defense increase as well. And so, I think Titan is one of the cooler new Pokemon, and there's so many different ways to run it. You don't necessarily need to run it in Snow, but Slush Rush is fairly powerful. It does get access to some nice setup moves like Belly Drum, for example, as well. But yeah, the general idea here is Abomasnow makes it really difficult for Titan to faint. Next combo to talk about here is Lilligant plus Torkoal. This is one that doesn't really need any introduction if you played back during Sun and Moon, but essentially the idea here is that Lilligant can go for After You on Torkoal, allowing you to get Choice Specs, Fire, Terra boosted eruptions immediately. Since Lilligant is really fast with Chlorophyll activated and Torkoal naturally sets up the Sun, this duo is really, really powerful. You can also, of course, just go for Sleep Powder because often players will be like, okay, well, you know, I'm really going to try to target down Torkoal and make sure that you just don't survive for more than like a turn, and then Lilligant can then pressure with Sleep Powder. So it's really tough to cover for the combination of both. With Lilligant, I've seen Ghost Terra, for example, to bypass Fake Out. This set has Ground Terra to deal Terra Blast, and that's pretty valuable into opposing fire types, for example. Torkoal's a Pokemon you're going to see a lot of, I think, either paired with Pokemon like Lilligant or Jumpluff, as well as Trick Room teams, and we'll talk about Trick Room in just a little bit. Rain is the next combo, and I think Rain has been significantly reduced in terms of power from previous generations, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, Scald got nerfed, right? Only Volcanion gets access to it now, and so as a result, it's a little bit difficult for Water-type Pokemon often to deal a lot of damage, and Fish for burns as well. Scald was just one of the best moves you could have on Water-type Pokemon. Second of all, there aren't really that many great Swift Swim users, and I think part of the problem with Rain as well is that now in a format where Terra exists, like, a lot of the Pokemon that like to utilize Rain, and like our Swift Swim users, for example, like this Barraskewda, aren't exactly the bulkiest Pokemon, and so you really need to aim for knockouts with them generally, because if not, your opponent can often just retaliate back with a KO. But yeah, I think Pelipper, Barraskewda is a combo that you could consider. One of the upsides, I think, of Rain is that it does actually match up decently well into a lot of the other weathers, right? Like, especially if you're able to switch in Pelipper at the right time. But I do think Rain has fallen off a little bit relative to previous generations. Final combo to talk about here is Tyranitar plus the Houndstone. So Tyranitar, like I mentioned earlier, right, there are a lot of different ways you can run this. It could be more support oriented. You can run a Dragon Dance set as well. Houndstone is really interesting. I actually featured this set built by a player called Ethan that was a support-oriented set with Snarl, Will-O-Wisp, and Nightshade, but of course this gets access to a really cool signature attack and can certainly be run offensively with a lot more attack investment, for example. So it depends on what you're looking for from Houndstone, but I think both support and offensive work. I've seen offensive a little bit more so far, but I think this Pokemon is just fairly underexplored in early VGC. Now I want to talk a little bit about brand new strategies. This is mainly only going to cover 2 new strategies that I think will be especially common in the early format. Of course, with the brand new format and new Pokemon, there are going to be a ton of brand new ones, but these are 2 that I think you absolutely need to prepare for. The first one is the Tatsugiri plus the Dondozo plus the Flamigo combination. The idea here is that Tatsugiri will be able to go into Dondozo, right? And you know, one of the things initially I thought about was like, okay, well, if the Tatsugiri is just stuck infinitely in Dondozo and you only have 1 Pokemon out versus 2, well, maybe it's not exactly the strongest. But we have these combinations with either Black Sludge or Toxic Orb, for example, where the Tatsugiri will eventually faint within the Dondozo. And once it faints, it allows you to bring in a new Pokemon, such as the Flamigo, which can then copy Dondozo's stat boost via its ability Co-Star. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can utilize this trio, but this is just one sample way built by Hari, who is one of the best players from Europe, and he put out a bunch of sample teams. A lot of the EV spreads I've already shown are from some of the teams that he's featured. And so, yeah, the idea is that, like, you can often Endure, for example, as well, and then faint within Dondozo and then immediately bring in the Flamigo. Also, I've seen, for example, Explosion or Side Final Gambit next to the Tatsugiri so that you get the free switch into Dondozo immediately without risking it taking any damage. And yeah, this combo can just be pretty nasty, especially because Dondozo does have Unaware, which ignores other stat changes. Actually, all of its abilities are fairly good here. But I think the main thing that really makes this strong is the ability for Tatsugiri to faint within Dondozo. So look out for like the Black Sludge or the Toxic Orb combinations, for example. And then, of course, yeah, the Flamigo being able to come in and just copy the boost immediately is incredibly powerful. So this is going to be a trio that I think you're going to see a lot of early on because, yeah, it is just strong. People were already using this in like a format with Paradox Pokemon, and now remove the Paradox Pokemon and the Legendary Pokemon. I think it's even stronger. So the other combo to talk about here is the Slacking and the Grafai combination. I also made a video about this pretty recently, so if you want to see that, I'll link it down in the description below. One reason why I think this is stronger in Series 1 is because with no Paradox or Legendary Pokemon allowed, you actually have a lot more Pokemon to potentially doodle. Now, when I use this combination, one of the major weaknesses is that, for example, you can't doodle a single Paradox Pokemon. You also can't doodle, like, Dark-type Pokemon, for example, if you have Prankster as your ability. Like, if you get rid of Prankster, then you can consider going for doodle, right? But the idea is that there are a lot of Pokemon, especially when all the Pokemon are allowed, including the Paradox Pokemon, including Chi-Yu, Chien-Pao, for example, that Grafai can't just copy. But in Series 1, I think there's a lot more viability for this duo because, yeah, you can go with Doodle often with a lot more ease, getting rid of Slacking's ability. And so, yeah, this is a duo that I had a lot of fun trying out, and the general idea, of course, is to get rid of Truant on Slacking, and it just has such crazy base HP, attack, defense, and speed, right? And so it can be a really potent sweeper, especially with the Bulk Up combination. Finally, I just listed Palafin here. It's a really interesting Pokemon. I know it was especially strong in single battles. I still think it's kind of hard to execute in VGC, but a lot of top players have kind of built Choice Scarf variants where the idea is you just flip turn out immediately and then bring this out for a late game sweeper. So I think this is a Pokemon that has a lot of potential. Choice Scarf is probably how a lot of players are going to use it early on, but, you know, I think that this is one that I'm definitely going to be following as the metagame develops because, yeah, I mean, obviously its ability is just so interesting, and the new form is also just ultra powerful. But, yeah, like, naturally, these are combos that people have already used, and I think will be strong starting from day one. The next group of Pokemon I talk about are Trick Room-oriented Pokemon. Trick Trick Room is a tale as old as time. The idea is that you use really slow Pokemon and you set up Trick Room. These slow Pokemon now move faster and can look to get big knockouts as quickly as possible. And so with Terra, Trick Room becomes even scarier because you'll have things like Choice Specs Fire, Terra, Torkoal, for example, which can just dish out so much damage, especially when supported with moves such as Helping Hand or Instruct from a Oranguru, for example. So listed a couple of good Trick Room setters as well as attackers under Trick Room. First one is Gothitelle. This is just a Pokemon that, of course, has existed in VGC for a while, won the 2014 World Championships on Sejum Park's team, and generally has good utility. Now with Terra as well, you can go for defensive Terra just to bypass like a big one-hit KO, and I think a lot of different viable items on Gothitelle. In Sword and Shield, we actually saw players run max speed Gothitelle, and the idea was that it can like go for Hypnosis, but on Trick Room teams, I think, yeah, you can just look for a moveset like this, for example, and consider items such as Mentorb, for example. Hatterene is a Trick Room Pokemon that was introduced in Sword and Shield, and it also now sadly got lost access to Expanding Force, but still fairly viable, and you still do a lot of damage with Life Orb Psychics, for example, often paired with NDD, so you can just go for Follow Me into Trick Room. Bronzong's a Pokemon that has seen very, very good usage, especially in restricted formats, and the idea is that it's just fairly difficult to knock out. I think Terra makes this Pokemon really cool as well, because you can Terra into something like Water, and suddenly your matchup against Torkoal is a lot stronger than what it used to be. Because previously, it's like, oh, okay, I can Iron Defense all I want, but as soon as Torkoal hits the field, I gotta just switch this Pokemon out anyway. So this is just a bulky Trick Room setter that can also increase its defense via Iron Defense, and then start dishing out good damage via Body Press. The next Pokemon here is Farigiraf. Sorry, Farigiraf. I've been calling it Farigiraf a lot, and I know it tilts people, but it's just funny to me. It looks like it is a giraffe, right? But Farigiraf is really cool because it gets access to Armor Tail, which is an incredible ability, preventing it from priority moves, such as Fake Out or Prankster Taunt. And this is a set that was used on a Japanese winning team on a grassroots tournament. It was paired with Murkrow, which is why you actually have speed investment here, but you could easily just drop all the speed investment, go quiet, and go for like max HP, max special attack, for example. This is a set that's kind of like pseudo Trick Room, but actually also anti-Trick Room, and so it's not something like, you know, this EV spread and this moveset in particular isn't something you're going to use generally on a hard Trick Room team. For those, you'll probably just, take away the speed investment, but this is a cool Pokemon that can also shut down opposing Trick Rooms, but can also set up for teams that are like middle tier speed, for example. Oranguru is the next Pokemon to talk about. This was fairly good in the 2017 format. Instruct just allows you to, copy a move and go for it again, which is really, really nice. And so Torkoal naturally synergizes really sweet with Oranguru. And Oranguru, like having access to Inner Focus means you're immune to flinch. And you can also run like safety goggles, for example, to prevent yourself from getting hit by Spore. Amoonguss is generally one of the biggest counter to Trick Room oriented compositions. So having a Goggles or a Lumberry, for example, can really pay off dividends. Mimikyu is also a classic Trick Room setter. Disguise plus Mentor makes it really difficult to deny Trick Room, and so, this isn't really any different from the ones that we saw throughout Sword and Shield, but just generally really effective. Armarouge is one of the new Trick Room setters that I think is incredibly, incredibly powerful, and I do expect players to kind of try to build around this early on. First of all, it gets access to Flash Fire, which is really nice in itself, because otherwise Torkoal and other Fire-type Pokemon can be annoying. Having a immunity to it is really nice. Second of all, it's just got great base stats overall, and a really cool kind of set of moves as well. So this set was designed by Jamie Boyd, who's the 3-time regional champion, and has top cut the World Championships multiple times. A lot of flexibility with its moveset as well as its EV spread here, but this is one of the new Trick Room setters that I think will be popular earlier on. At this point, I've talked a lot about all the Trick Room setters. Let's talk about some potential attackers under Trick Room. Torkoal is the first one that I mentioned here, and Choice Specs is just really powerful, but you could also expect to see items such as Charcoal, for example. Hariyama is also a really nice Pokemon that can deal massive amounts of damage. This Pokemon was one of my favorite Pokemon back in the 2014 Regional Dex format. It's relatively slow, but it's super bulky. This is a Flame Orb plus Guts set, so it's designed to just maximize your damage. Combination of Flame Orb Guts plus Fighting Terra plus Close Combat really can just poke holes through teams. And it's a Fake Out user as well, so you can lead it with your Trick Room user, Fake Out into Trick Room, and then just start attacking with both. Part of the problem for a lot of Fake Out users that are paired with Trick Room is that they just don't do very much damage, but Hariyama does not suffer from that problem. Finally, Mudsdale is another interesting Trick Room Pokemon to talk about, where, once again, you have Inner Focus, so you are immune to Intimidate, and with Choice Band, you can just deal so much damage with all of your attacks, and boost your ground-type attacks even more thanks to Terra as well. So, these are just some examples of Trick Room Pokemon or Trick Room sweepers that are really strong after you set up the Trick Room. The final group of Pokemon I have here are just ones that didn't fit in the earlier categories, but are ones that are just generally powerful, and I've already seen players use. And so we've got Choice Band, Dragonite, I did a video covering Dragonite and why Choice Band plus normal plus extreme speed is really sweet, but generally the idea is that this just can do a lot of damage, and Inner Focus is an amazing ability as well, making you immune to both Intimidate and Flinches. And so, yeah, this was really common with Champao in the early doubles in Scarlet and Violet, but Champao no longer is allowed in the format. That being said, I think this still has a lot of utility, has, you know, good base stats overall, and can do a lot of damage. So I think people will still use it. Dragonite, of course, is really flexible, so Choice Band is one of the ways to run it, but there's so many other ways to run it. I do think that as the metagame develops, perhaps people will move away from Choice Band. It just feels like an early meta pick that a lot of people are slapping onto their teams right now. Sylveon's another pick. I think that this is a Pokemon that, you know, will generally run similar moves. You might see something like Fairy Terra. It did lose access to Mystical Fire, so Fairy Terra plus, for example, Terra Blast is a combination that you can run as well. Pixie Plate is in Scarlet and Violet, but you can't actually get it right now, and so Throat Spray is the default item. But Choice Specs was an item that a lot of people used back in VGC 2015, which was cool. This could also be Calm Mind sets, but obviously it takes a little bit of time to get going. Calm Mind Leftovers was something I actually used at the 2015 World Championships, and so it's something interesting to explore, but Throat Spray is just fairly easy to execute, and Yawn's just really good utility. And to round out the final Pokemon, we've got Dragapult. I've seen Dragapult run a lot of different ways already, whether it be Choice Specs, Choice Band, or even like Focus Sash support, for example. But this was a set that was built by the 2022 World Championship finalist, Guillermo Castilla, and he used a Choice Specs Infiltrator set with Shadow Ball, Draco Meteor, Terra Blast, and U-Turn with Steel Terra, which was pretty cool. So you could Terra Steel and then really threaten a lot of the Fairy types that wouldn't expect to just get one shot, for example. And finally, King Gambit is one of the brand new Pokemon. Of course, the evolution of Bisharp that has really, really nice HP, attack, and defense, and honestly, a really solid base special defense as well. You can run either Defiant or Supreme Overlord. I think both abilities are pretty solid, but the idea is that this is just a fairly difficult Pokemon to knock out. I've seen different Terra types utilized for this as well. I've seen Lum as the item on King Gambit as well. So yeah, I think it's just like generally good coverage. Like Sucker Punch with base 135 attack is certainly nothing to scoff at, and Iron Head is nice coverage, of course, into like fairy types in particular. So yeah. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Once again, these are just some sample sets and some Pokemon that I think you should expect to see early on in the format. I did cover some niche ones like Palmot here and there, but overall, I feel fairly confident that most of the Pokemon I've covered here are things that you're going to see as soon as the format starts. So once again, as a reminder, there's so many different ways to build these Pokemon. Just because I featured one set here doesn't mean that's going to be the most popular one or the one that you should always expect. But once again, the idea is to just give you some sense of how players might be running said Pokemon and maybe give you some inspiration for how you might want to run that Pokemon as well. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about the Series 1 rule set. I can't wait to dive into competitive battles in official VGC. Obviously, I've been playing doubles for the last week or so, but yeah, I'm just really eager to finally dive into things. And this was my first time making a video like this where I kind of just offered sample sets and talked through it. And so yeah, let me know what you thought about it for this generation. Let me know how I can improve on it. And thank you so much as always for watching. My name is CybertronVGC. If you enjoyed, please share your support by leaving a like, and I'll see you all very, very soon. All right, peace.